Welcome to Sleepless Ancient Odyssey. The day is done. It is time now to let the noise of your world fade into silence. Find your most comfortable position, and for the next few moments, simply relax. Tonight's Odyssey is about to begin. Tonight, we journey to the land where the Nile flows eternal, where gods walked among mortals, and where death itself could be conquered by love. You will witness the first murder, the first resurrection, and a devotion so profound it would reshape the heavens. You will walk among the temples of ancient Egypt, and you will discover how a story of love and betrayal became the foundation of an entire civilization's understanding of life, death, and immortality. This is not merely history. This is the myth that taught humanity to hope beyond the grave. Whether you are here for a story to captivate your mind, or a grand narrative to accompany you to sleep, your journey starts now. If you enjoy these odysseys, subscribe and join us every time we travel to the past. Now, let us begin. Chapter 1. The Golden Age of the Gods. Before the pyramids rose from the desert sand, before the pharaohs carved their names into eternity, there was a time when gods ruled Egypt directly. Not as distant powers observing from celestial heights, but as living beings who walked the black soil of the Nile Valley, who felt the sun on their faces, who breathed the same air as the people they governed. This was the age of Ra, the sun god, whose daily journey across the sky brought light and order to the world. Each morning he was born anew in the east, a child of infinite promise. By noon he stood triumphant, a king in his prime, and each evening he descended into the western horizon, an old man returning to the underworld, only to be reborn again with the dawn. The Egyptians watched this eternal cycle and understood that existence itself was a pattern of death and renewal, ending and beginning, darkness and light. But Ra grew weary of his earthly reign. The years stretched behind him like the Nile itself, countless and eternal. He had seen civilizations rise from nomadic tribes. He had watched the first seeds planted in the fertile mud after the floods. He had guided humanity from stone tools to copper, from simple shelters to magnificent temples. The weight of immortality, the burden of endless responsibility, began to rest heavy upon his divine shoulders. So Ra made a decision that would change the very nature of existence. He would ascend to the heavens permanently, becoming the sun itself, the eye that watches all but touches nothing. And in his place, he would leave a successor, a god young enough to still love the world, wise enough to rule it justly, and powerful enough to maintain the cosmic order known as May-At. That successor was Osiris. Osiris emerged into rulership like the Nile flood itself, inevitable, life-giving, transformative. He was not merely a king. He was kingship personified. His skin carried the green of growing things, the color of regeneration and fertility. When he walked through the land, crops flourished in his footsteps. When he spoke, his words fell like rain on parched earth, bringing sustenance and wisdom. But Osiris did not rule alone. At his side stood Isis, his sister and his wife, his equal in power and his complement in purpose. If Osiris was the fertile earth, Isis was the magic that animated it. If he was the gift of abundance, she was the knowledge of how to use it. Together, they formed a divine partnership that the ancient Egyptians would remember for thousands of years as the ideal of marriage, of cooperation, of love that transcended even the boundaries between life and death. Isis possessed something that even the greatest gods envied: Heka, magic, the fundamental power of creation itself. She knew the true names of things, and in ancient Egypt, to know the true name was to have absolute power over that thing. She could heal with a word, transform with a gesture, command the very elements with her voice. The Egyptians would later call her the great of magic, the clever of tongue, she who knows how to make right use of the heart. The land prospered under their reign in ways it never had before. Osiris taught the people agriculture, showing them which seeds to plant, when to sow, how to harvest. He taught them to make bread from grain and beer from barley. He gave them laws that were fair and just, codes of behavior that allowed communities to thrive. He showed them how to honor the gods properly, how to build temples that could house divine presence, how to offer prayers that would be heard. And Isis walked among the people as well, teaching the women the arts of weaving and medicine, showing them how to grind grain and bake bread, sharing with them the secrets of childbirth and the care of the young. She was the mother goddess, the protector, the one who understood the concerns of mortal hearts because she herself loved so deeply. In those days, Egypt knew no want. The Nile flooded perfectly each year, neither too little nor too much. The sun shone in its appointed times. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal patterns. Harmony reigned. Order prevailed. The universe seemed balanced on the edge of perfection. But in every paradise there exists the seed of its own undoing. In every perfect moment, time is already preparing its changes. And in the divine court of Osiris and Isis, there walked another god, one who watched the prosperity with different eyes, one who saw the love between Osiris and Isis and felt something dark coiling in his chest. His name was Set. Set was the brother of Osiris, twin in some accounts, younger sibling in others, but always the opposite. Where Osiris brought order, Set embodied chaos. Where Osiris represented the fertile black land of the Nile Valley, Set ruled the red desert that surrounded it, the harsh wastes where nothing grew, where storms arose without warning, where the unwary traveler could lose his way and perish under the merciless sun. Set was not evil, not in the way we might understand it today. He was necessary. The desert that killed could also protect Egypt from invaders. The chaos he embodied was the same force that allowed change to happen, prevented stagnation, kept the universe from becoming static and dead. Even storms serve a purpose. Even destruction makes way for new growth. But Set looked upon his brother's kingdom and felt something that would lead to catastrophe. Not merely envy, though that was present. Not simply ambition, though he possessed that in abundance. What Set felt was older and darker. He felt that he should have been chosen, that he deserved the throne, that Osiris, perfect Osiris with his beautiful wife and his prosperous kingdom, had stolen what was rightfully his. And so, in the golden age when gods walked the earth and Egypt knew only peace, a plan began to form in Set's mind. A plan that would shatter the harmony of the world. A plan that would introduce humanity to its first great tragedy. A plan for murder. The palace of Osiris stood at the heart of the world, a place where heaven touched earth. Its walls rose white and gleaming in the Egyptian sun, covered in reliefs that told the stories of creation. Its gardens burst with flowers that bloomed year-round, their perfume drifting through corridors where gods and mortals alike conducted the business of governance. At its center stood the throne room, a vast chamber where Osiris held court, dispensing justice and wisdom to all who sought it. It was a place of open doors and welcoming halls. Osiris believed in transparency, in accessibility. Any being, divine or mortal, could approach him with their concerns. There were no secrets in his court, no hidden chambers or locked doors. This openness was both his strength and, as events would prove, his vulnerability. Set moved through this palace like a shadow, always present, always watching. He served as Osiris's general, the commander of divine forces, the defender of Egypt's borders. It was a role that suited his nature. While Osiris cultivated life, Set protected it from threats. While Isis worked her magic to heal and create, Set wielded his power to destroy Egypt's enemies. He was the warrior god, the storm that swept away invaders, the desert wind that buried armies beneath the sand. In his role, Set had access to everything. He knew the layout of the palace intimately. He understood the routines of his brother's daily life. He observed which guards stood where, which servants entered which chambers, when Osiris was alone and when he was surrounded by his court. And as he watched, his resentment grew like a poisonous plant in his heart. The Egyptians would later ask themselves, what tips a soul toward darkness? Is it a single moment of rejection? A lifetime of perceived slights? Or is there something in certain spirits that simply gravitates toward destruction, the way water flows downhill, inevitable and natural? Perhaps Set had always carried this capacity within him. Perhaps every being who personifies chaos must constantly struggle against their own nature, and Set had simply grown tired of the struggle. Or perhaps it was simpler than that. Perhaps he looked at Osiris and Isis and saw something he could never have. Not just power or position, but love. The kind of love that made two beings into one, that created strength from vulnerability, that transformed mere existence into meaning. Whatever the reason, Set made his decision. Osiris would die, and Set would take what should have been his from the beginning. But to kill a god is not a simple matter. Gods do not fall to common weapons. A knife would not pierce divine flesh. Poison would not corrupt an immortal body. Even Set's considerable power, his control over storms and chaos, could not simply unmake his brother. The gods existed beyond the normal rules of mortality. They could be injured, perhaps. Weakened, maybe. But to actually end a god's existence required something more. It required cunning. Set was many things, but he was not a fool. He knew that a direct confrontation would fail. Osiris was beloved by every god in the Egyptian pantheon except Set himself. Isis's magic could counter almost any threat. The people of Egypt would rise in rebellion if they knew what he planned. No, this had to be done carefully, subtly, with a trap so clever that even wise Osiris would not see it until too late. And so Set began to plan, measuring his brother like a carpenter measures wood for a coffin. He observed Osiris carefully, noting his exact height from the crown of his head to the soles of his feet. He measured the breadth of his shoulders, the length of his arms, the span of his chest. Day by day, he gathered these measurements, always under the guise of brotherly affection, a friendly embrace that lasted just long enough to gauge the width of his back, a helpful hand on the shoulder to estimate its height, a walk together where Set matched his stride to Osiris's, counting the length of his legs. The palace servants noticed nothing unusual. Set had always been present, always been part of the court. If he seemed more attentive to his brother lately, if he spent more time in Osiris's company, well, perhaps the chaos god was finally learning to appreciate order. Perhaps the desert was learning to value the river. It seemed like a hopeful sign, a healing of divine tensions. Only Set knew the truth. With each measurement, with each observation, he was building something in his mind. A trap. A beautiful, deadly trap. Meanwhile, the world continued its blessed routine. The Nile rose and fell in its season. Farmers planted and harvested. Children were born and grew. The temples filled with worshippers who brought offerings of bread and beer, flowers and incense, gratitude and prayers. Egypt flourished under Osiris's green hand, and Isis moved through the land like a protective blessing, her magic woven into the very fabric of existence. Isis, brilliant Isis, whose magic could uncover almost any secret, whose power could see through almost any deception, noticed nothing, not because her powers had failed her, not because her wisdom had diminished, but because Set was her brother too, because she trusted him as family, because in that golden age of divine rule, betrayal was not yet a concept fully understood. Evil, you see, must be learned. Hatred must be taught. And sometimes the teacher is time itself, showing us possibilities we never imagined, revealing depths of darkness we never knew existed in the hearts of those we love. Set smiled as he walked through the palace, his plans taking shape. He spoke pleasantly to Osiris. He bowed respectfully to Isis. He performed his duties as general with impeccable efficiency. And all the while, in a workshop far from the palace, in a place where no divine eyes watched, craftsmen labored under his direction. They were building something beautiful, something deadly. They were building a chest. The chest took shape over weeks of careful labor. The craftsman Set had chosen worked with the finest materials Egypt could provide. Cedar wood imported from the forests of Lebanon, aromatic and rich. Gold leaf to cover the exterior, hammered thin until it caught the light like captured sunlight. Lapis lazuli for inlays, blue as the night sky, spotted with gold flecks like stars. Ivory and ebony for decorative elements. Carnelian and turquoise for additional embellishments. It was not merely a chest. It was a masterpiece. The kind of object that would make gods pause in admiration. The kind of treasure that would become the centerpiece of any divine collection. Beautiful enough to be irresistible, valuable enough to inspire desire. But its true magnificence lay not in its decoration, but in its dimensions. For this chest had been built to measurements very specific. It would fit exactly one being in all of creation. It had been crafted as perfectly as a sarcophagus fits a mummy, as snugly as a sheath fits a blade. It had been made to fit Osiris. Only Osiris. No other god, no other being, would match its interior dimensions precisely. Set examined the finished work with satisfaction. The lid closed smoothly, its edges aligned perfectly with the base. Hidden locks waited to spring shut at his command. Lead, molten and ready, stood prepared to seal any gaps once the lid was closed. And the weight. Yes, the weight would be considerable once filled. Heavy enough that even a god would struggle to lift it from the inside. Heavy enough to sink. The Nile would be its final destination. The great river that gave Egypt life would become a tomb. Set had planned even this detail carefully. The current in certain places ran deep and strong. A weighted chest, properly sealed, would vanish into the dark water, carried downstream away from the heart of Egypt, away from those who might search for it. And without a body, without physical remains, how could even Isis's magic restore Osiris? The gods were immortal, yes, but their immortality was bound to their forms. Destroy the form completely enough, scatter it widely enough, and even a god might not return. This was Set's hope, his dark, desperate hope. But first, he needed to get Osiris into the chest, and for that, he needed an occasion, a celebration, a gathering where such a magnificent object might be displayed, admired, and offered as a prize. Set began to speak of throwing a feast, a celebration of brotherhood, he called it. A festival to honor the bonds between divine siblings, to strengthen the family ties that united the gods. He praised Osiris publicly, speaking of his brother's wisdom and justice. He complimented Isis on her grace and magic. He played the role of the reformed brother, the chaos god learning to appreciate order, the desert wind learning to value the river's gift. And Osiris, loving and trusting Osiris, believed him. Why wouldn't he? Set was his brother. They had existed together since the beginning of time. They might be different, might even argue occasionally, but they were family. And family was sacred, even among gods. Isis felt a whisper of unease. Nothing she could name, nothing she could identify. Just a slight rippling in the fabric of things like a stone dropped in still water. Her magic sensed something, some disturbance in Mayat, the cosmic order. But when she reached out with her power to investigate, she found nothing concrete. Just Set, planning a celebration. Just a brother honoring his siblings. Just a feast where gods would gather to reaffirm their bonds. Still, the unease persisted. She spoke to Osiris about it one evening as they stood on a balcony overlooking the Nile. The sun was setting, painting the river in shades of gold and crimson. The air smelled of lotus blossoms and the rich earth of the riverbank. "Set troubles me," she said quietly. "I cannot say why, but Something in his manner lately feels wrong." Osiris took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "He is trying, my love. Chaos is learning to work with order. Storm is learning to coexist with peace. Should we not encourage this change? Should we not celebrate his effort to bridge the distance between us?" "Perhaps," Isis replied, but her voice carried doubt. "Or perhaps we mistake the coiling of a snake for the sleep of contentment." But Osiris laughed gently, his faith in his brother unshaken. "Not every shadow contains a threat, Isis. Not every change signals danger. Set has been my general, my defender, my brother since the beginning of time. Whatever his nature, whatever his struggles with his own chaotic essence, he would not betray that bond. Family is the foundation of Ma'at itself." And so the preparations continued. Invitations were sent to gods throughout the pantheon. The palace was decorated with garlands of flowers and ribbons of colored linen. Tables groaned under the weight of food and drink. Musicians tuned their instruments. Dancers practiced their movements. The celebration would be magnificent, worthy of the divine rulers of Egypt. The night of the feast arrived clear and warm, with stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky like diamonds scattered across blue velvet. Gods began to arrive in their various forms, some in human shape, some in animal aspect, some in that hybrid form that was uniquely Egyptian, human bodies with animal heads, the merging of earthly and divine nature. The great hall filled with immortal beings. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, engaged in deep conversation with Hathor, the cow-eared goddess of love and joy. Anubis, the jackal god who would one day become lord of embalming, stood tall and watchful near the entrance. Nephthys, Set's own wife and the twin sister of Isis, moved quietly through the crowd, her dark beauty a shadow to Isis's light. The feast began with all the pageantry and pleasure such gatherings deserved. Wine flowed like the Nile itself. Meat and bread, fruit and cakes, every delicacy Egypt could provide filled the tables. Music wove through the air, complex rhythms played on drums and sistrums, harps and flutes. Dancers moved with fluid grace, their movements telling stories of creation and harvest, love and celebration. Osiris presided over it all with his characteristic warmth and generosity. He moved among his guests, speaking to each, sharing laughter and stories. Isis remained at his side, still troubled by something she could not name, but gradually relaxing in the joy of the gathering. Perhaps she had been wrong. Perhaps Set truly was making an effort to heal old wounds. And Set watched and waited. And when the moment was right, when wine and music had loosened the careful attention of the gathered gods, he made his move. Set rose from his seat, commanding attention without effort. His presence was like a thundercloud filling the room. Powerful, electric, impossible to ignore. The music quieted. The conversation stilled. All eyes turned to him. "Brothers and sisters," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "we gather tonight to celebrate family, to honor the bonds that unite us as the divine rulers of Egypt. But I have prepared something special for this occasion. A gift, a prize for a game that I hope will entertain you all." At his gesture, servants brought forth the chest. Even in the firelight and lamplight of the hall, it was magnificent. The gold seemed to glow with its own internal radiance. The precious stones sparkled like captured stars. The craftsmanship was so exquisite that even gods who regularly handled objects of incredible beauty drew in their breath. "This chest," Set continued, "is perhaps the finest object ever crafted by mortal hands under divine guidance. It is worthy of housing the greatest treasures of Egypt, and I propose to give it as a gift to whomever it fits perfectly. Let us each try it for size, and whoever matches its dimensions exactly shall own it." It seemed like harmless fun, a game appropriate for a celebration. The gods laughed and agreed, each one curious to see if they might be the lucky winner of such a magnificent prize. The chest was opened, revealing an interior lined with the finest linen, padded and comfortable, almost like a bed. One by one, the gods climbed into the chest. Thoth's long legs extended beyond its edges. Hathor, in her human form, was too broad in the hips. Anubis found it too short for his considerable height. Each god tried and each failed to match the chest's exact dimensions. Some came close, but close was not perfect. The chest required an exact fit. The gods made a game of it, laughing at their mismatches, joking about Set's standards of perfection. The tension that had briefly accompanied Set's announcement dissolved into merriment. This was harmless. This was fun. This was merely another entertainment at a divine celebration. Finally, Set turned to Osiris. "Brother, you have not tried. Surely you, our king, should test whether this prize might be yours." Isis felt the whisper of unease suddenly scream into clear warning. She reached for Osiris's arm, but he was already moving forward, smiling, confident. He looked at the beautiful chest and saw only a work of art. He looked at his brother and saw only family. "Very well," Osiris said. "Let us see if perfection has made something that fits a king." He climbed into the chest with easy grace. He lay down in its padded interior, adjusting his position to fit comfortably. And he did fit. Perfectly. His head reached the exact height of the interior. His shoulders touched the sides with no gap and no pressure. His feet rested against the far end as if the chest had been molded around his body. "It fits," Osiris said, his voice carrying surprise and pleasure. "Set, this is remarkable craftsmanship. How did you?" He never finished the sentence. Set moved with the speed of a striking serpent. His hands slammed the lid down, the sound echoing through the hall like thunder. The hidden locks engaged with sharp clicks. Before anyone could react, before anyone could move, Set was calling for the molten lead, for the sealant that would make the chest permanently, eternally closed. The hall erupted into chaos. Gods surged forward, but Set's followers were already there, loyal to chaos, blocking access to the chest. Isis screamed and her magic flared, but Set had prepared even for this, had woven protections and counterspells, had chosen this moment when wine had dulled reflexes and music had distracted attention. "Brother," Nephthys cried out, her voice breaking with horror. "What have you done?" But Set's face showed no remorse, no hesitation, no doubt. "What I should have done from the beginning," he said. "I take what is mine. The throne of Egypt is mine. The crown is mine. The rule of this land belongs to chaos, not order. To the desert, not the river. To Set, not Osiris." Inside the chest, Osiris was pounding on the lid, his divine strength shaking the entire structure. But the lead was already being poured into the seams, sealing every crack, every gap. The interior was airtight, perfect, deadly. Isis reached the chest despite the obstacles, her hands already moving in patterns of unmaking, her voice beginning the words of a spell that could shatter any lock, dissolve any seal. But Set was faster. With a gesture, he commanded his followers to lift the chest. With a word, he opened a doorway to the outside, to the riverbank beyond. "To the Nile," he commanded. "Let the river take him. Let Egypt's own gift of life become his tomb." They carried the chest through the palace, gods and Set's followers struggling against each other, magic crackling in the air, chaos battling order for the first time in divine history. Isis pursued, her magic throwing back Set's followers, but more kept coming. The chaos, God's power multiplying his forces, creating barriers and obstacles. By the time she reached the riverbank, they were already pushing the chest into the water. By the time her spell of opening was complete, the chest had caught the current. By the time she could reach the river's edge, the chest was already moving downstream, heavy and inexorable, sinking lower and lower into the dark water. Isis dove into the Nile, her divine form cutting through the water like light through shadow. But the river had already taken Osiris. The current was carrying him away, downstream, out toward the delta, out toward the sea beyond. She swam until her strength failed, dove until the darkness became complete, searched until even her magic could find no trace. Osiris was gone. The first murder had been committed. The first betrayal had stained the divine world. And for the first time since creation, the perfect order of Mayat was broken. Death had entered the realm of the gods, and nothing would ever be the same. On the riverbank, Isis collapsed in grief, her sobs shaking the very foundations of earth. And in the palace behind her, Set sat on the throne of Egypt, crowned himself king, and dared the remaining gods to oppose him. The golden age had ended. The age of sorrow had begun. Isis wept, and the Nile rose with her tears. Not the gentle, predictable flood that brought life to the fields, but a surge of raw grief, an outpouring of loss so profound that it threatened to drown Egypt itself. The gods who witnessed her mourning felt their own hearts break, for they had never seen such pain, never imagined that immortal beings could suffer this deeply. She spent 7 days and 7 nights on the riverbank, refusing to move, refusing to eat or drink, refusing even the comfort of her fellow gods who came to support her. Her sister, Nephthys, sat beside her in silent vigil. The two goddesses united in grief despite their husband's enmity. For Nephthys, too, had lost something precious. The belief that her husband was capable of good, the hope that chaos could coexist peacefully with order. "He is gone," Isis whispered again and again, her voice hoarse from crying. "Osiris is gone, and I cannot find him. My magic, which can name the stars and command the winds, cannot locate one single chest in all the waters of Egypt. How can this be? How can love itself be defeated so easily?" But on the 8th day, something shifted in Isis. The grief did not diminish, but it transformed. It became a different kind of force, not the overwhelming tide of despair, but a focused, burning determination. Osiris was gone, yes. Lost, certainly. But was he truly beyond recovery? Was any magic truly impossible for the goddess who knew the secret names of all things? She rose from the riverbank, her appearance changed by sorrow but her spirit unbroken. She had made a decision. She would find Osiris. She would search every finger of the Nile, every stream and tributary, every pool and marsh. She would walk the entire length of Egypt if necessary. She would venture beyond Egypt's borders if the search required it. She would not rest, would not stop, would not abandon hope until she held her husband's body once more. But she could not do this as a goddess, in her full divine glory. Set now ruled Egypt, his followers everywhere, his power spreading like a desert storm across the land. If Isis appeared openly, if she used her magic too visibly, Set would know. He would hinder her search, place obstacles in her path, perhaps even try to destroy her. No, she needed to be subtle, hidden. She needed to search as mortals searched, on foot, with human eyes, moving among the people who might have seen something, heard something, noticed a strange chest floating downstream. Isis transformed herself. She dimmed her divine radiance until she appeared as an ordinary woman, her beauty still present but human, her power still vast but concealed. She dressed in the simple linen shift of a common Egyptian, placed a shawl over her head, and began to walk. She walked south along the Nile, asking questions in every village she passed. Had anyone seen a chest? A beautiful chest, gold and jeweled, floating in the river? The villagers shook their heads, sympathetic to this woman who seemed to have lost something precious but unable to help. Some offered food and shelter, which Isis accepted gratefully, touched by mortal kindness even in her divine grief. She walked north toward the delta, following the river's branching paths, checking every side channel and backwater. She spoke to fishermen mending their nets, to farmers irrigating their fields, to children playing by the water's edge. Had they seen a chest? A magnificent chest that should not be in the river at all? But no one had seen anything unusual. The Nile kept its secrets well. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Isis walked the length of Egypt, her feet blistering despite her divine nature, her body growing thin despite being immortal. She was learning something profound, that to truly love is to be willing to suffer, and suffering does not discriminate between gods and mortals. Pain is pain, whether felt by an immortal heart or a human one. In the palace in Memphis, Set ruled with an iron fist. He had declared himself Pharaoh, the first to claim that title that would echo through Egyptian history for thousands of years. He appointed his followers to positions of power, dismissed or intimidated those loyal to Osiris, and worked to consolidate his control over Egypt. But his rule was troubled from the start. The Nile's floods became unpredictable. Sometimes too little water came, leaving fields parched. Sometimes too much, drowning crops before they could be harvested. The divine order that Osiris had established began to fray. Storms came out of season. The desert pressed closer to the river. Animals that had been docile became dangerous. It was as if nature itself rebelled against Set's rule, as if Ma'at, the cosmic order, could not function properly with chaos sitting on the throne. The people whispered in their homes at night. They remembered Osiris with longing. They told stories of the golden age when the god-king walked among them, when prosperity was assured, when justice was always available. And they whispered about Isis, too, the goddess who had vanished, who was said to be searching for her lost husband, who might one day return to set things right. Set heard these whispers and felt fear for the first time in his existence. He had thought that killing Osiris would be enough, but death, he was learning, was not always the end. Memory persisted. Love persisted. Hope persisted. And as long as these things remained, his rule would never be secure. Meanwhile, Isis's search continued. She moved beyond Egypt's borders now, following every rumor, every possibility. And then, in a distant land called Byblos, on the shores of the Mediterranean, she heard a story that made her heart race with renewed hope. A tree had grown, the locals said, in the courtyard of the royal palace. But not an ordinary tree. This tamarind tree had grown with impossible speed, shooting up from a seedling to a massive trunk in a matter of days. And within that trunk, sealed by the wood itself, there was something. A chest. A golden chest that had washed ashore and somehow been consumed by the growing tree. The king of Byblos, impressed by this miraculous tree and the sweet fragrance that emanated from it, had cut it down and made it into a pillar for his palace, the chest still sealed within. And now that pillar stood in the great hall, beautiful and aromatic, and none knew the treasure and the tragedy it contained. Isis stood on the shore at Byblos and looked toward the palace, and for the first time in months she felt something other than despair. She felt possibility. She felt hope. But she also felt caution. For she knew that retrieving Osiris would require all her cleverness, all her magic, all her skill at transformation and persuasion. The search was not over. In fact, the most difficult part was just beginning. But Isis had walked the length of the Nile. She had suffered and persevered. She had proven that divine love could endure any hardship. And now, standing in a foreign land, looking at a palace that held her greatest treasure, she began to plan. Isis approached the palace of Byblos not as a goddess, but as a foreign woman seeking employment. She made herself appear older, more worn by life, the kind of person who might need work and would be grateful for any position offered. Her divine beauty she buried deep, leaving only the appealing features of an experienced woman who might serve as a nurse or handmaid. The queen of Byblos had recently given birth to a son, and she was looking for someone to help care for the infant. When Isis appeared at the palace gates, offering her services, claiming experience with children, the queen's servants brought her before their mistress. The queen, whose name was Astarte, looked at this foreign woman and felt an inexplicable trust, a warmth that she could not quite explain. "What is your name?" the queen asked. "I am. A stranger in your land," Isis replied carefully. "I have lost everything and everyone dear to me, but I am skilled in the care of children. I can nurse your son, keep him safe, teach him gentleness and strength, if you will have me." Astarte, moved by something in the woman's voice, by a depth of sorrow that spoke of profound loss, agreed. And so Isis became the nurse to the prince of Byblos, a goddess caring for a mortal child, all the while aware that her true husband lay entombed in the pillar that supported the very hall where she now served. At night, when the palace slept, Isis would approach the pillar. She would place her hands against the wood, feeling through it for Osiris's presence, and she could sense him there, still existing in some form, neither truly alive nor completely dead. The chest had preserved him, the tree had protected him, and some spark of divine essence remained. But to free him, she would need to reveal herself. To reveal herself would risk Set discovering where she was, and Set, she knew, would do anything to prevent Osiris from being recovered. So Isis waited and planned, caring for the infant prince with genuine affection, becoming beloved by the royal family, slowly building the trust and relationship she would need to achieve her goal. The Egyptians would later marvel at this, how the greatest goddess of their pantheon humbled herself to serve mortals. How she, who commanded magic beyond comprehension, changed diapers and sang lullabies, how divine majesty could clothe itself in mundane duty. But those who understood love knew there was no contradiction. When you love someone enough, no task is beneath you, no sacrifice is too great, no role is too humble. Isis washed a baby and waited, because that baby's mother held the key to freeing Osiris, and patience was another form of devotion. The infant prince thrived under Isis's care. She sang to him in the ancient language of creation, lullabies that carried echoes of the first songs sung when the world was new. She rocked him with the rhythm of the Nile's eternal flow. And she did something else, something the queen would not discover until later. She began to make the child immortal. Each night, when the palace fell silent and darkness filled the halls, Isis would perform a ritual. She would place the infant in the palace fires, letting divine flames burn away his mortality while she transformed herself into a swallow, flying circles around the pillar that held Osiris, singing songs of protection and preservation. The flames did not harm the child, for these were not ordinary fires. They were the flames of transformation, the sacred heat that could purify and perfect, that could burn away the weakness of human flesh and replace it with something eternal. But one night, Queen Astarte could not sleep. Perhaps maternal instinct woke her. Perhaps the gods themselves arranged this moment. She rose from her bed and went to check on her son, and what she saw stopped her heart with terror. Her infant child lay in the flames of the hearth, surrounded by fire, while a swallow circled overhead, singing in no language she recognized. The nurse was nowhere to be seen, only the bird and the fire, and her baby in mortal danger. Astarte screamed, a mother's scream that brought guards running, that woke the entire palace, that shattered the careful spell Isis had been weaving. And in that moment, faced with a mother's terror and the ruin of her careful plans, Isis had no choice. She let her divine form blaze forth. The humble nurse vanished. In her place stood a goddess of terrible beauty and power. Light radiated from her skin. Her eyes held stars. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the weight of creation itself. The guards fell to their knees. The queen stumbled backward, torn between fear and awe. "Peace," Isis said, and the word carried such authority that even the flames in the hearth stilled. "I am Isis of Egypt. I mean no harm to your child. I sought only to give him the gift of immortality, to repay your kindness to me with the greatest blessing I could bestow. But you have interrupted the ritual, and now the gift cannot be completed." She lifted the child from the flames, perfectly unharmed, not even a hair singed. She placed him gently in his mother's arms. Astarte held her son, trembling, trying to comprehend what she was witnessing. A goddess, an Egyptian goddess, here in Byblos, disguised as a nurse, attempting to make her son immortal. "Why?" Astarte whispered. "Why are you here? What do you want from us?" Isis turned to look at the pillar, and her expression carried such profound grief that Astarte felt tears spring to her own eyes in sympathy. "That pillar," Isis said softly, "the beautiful pillar that supports your hall. Within it lies something precious beyond measure, the body of my husband, the great god Osiris, murdered by his brother and cast into the Nile. The river carried him here. A tree grew around his coffin, and you, unknowing, made that tree into the pillar that now graces your home." The queen looked at the pillar with new understanding and new horror. A god's body, entombed in wood, holding up their ceiling. No wonder the tree had grown so quickly. No wonder its fragrance was so sweet and strange. No wonder this foreign woman had seemed so drawn to their palace. "Take it," Astarte said immediately. "Take the pillar. We will rebuild. Take what is yours, and may the gods forgive us for unknowingly imprisoning your husband." Isis felt gratitude surge through her divine heart. "Your kindness will be remembered," she said. "Byblos will always hold a special place in Egyptian hearts. Your son, though he cannot be fully immortal now, will live a long and blessed life. And you, Queen Astarte, will be honored in story and song for your compassion to a grieving goddess." The king of Byblos was summoned and told the truth. Though shaken by the revelation of divine presence in his palace, he too agreed without hesitation. The pillar was carefully brought down, the hall supported by other means, and Isis, with infinite care, with magic both powerful and precise, split the wood. The chest was revealed at last. Isis's hands trembled as she touched it. Months of searching had led to this moment. All the walking, all the grief, all the humble service, it had all been for this. The chest was sealed as Set had left it, the lead still solid, the locks still engaged. But for Isis, these were minor obstacles. She spoke the words of opening. She commanded the lead to soften and flow away. She called upon the authority that knowing true names gave her. The chest opened. Osiris lay within, still and silent. His skin had taken on an ashen hue, but his form remained intact. The green vitality that had once colored his divine flesh was gone, replaced by the gray of death. He did not breathe. His heart did not beat. But something remained, some essential spark that had not yet fully departed. Isis lifted her husband from the chest with strength that came not from muscle but from will, from love that refused to accept defeat, from magic that could bend the very rules of existence. She held him, this god who had ruled Egypt with such wisdom, and she wept anew. But these were different tears, not the helpless tears of loss, but the fierce tears of determination. "I have found you," she whispered against his still chest. "Now I will restore you." The royal family of Byblos provided Isis with ships, supplies, gifts of thanks and apology. She blessed them in return, her magic settling over their kingdom like a protective veil. The infant prince would indeed live long and prosper. Byblos would become a crucial trading partner with Egypt. The kindness shown to a goddess in disguise would echo through generations. Isis sailed back to Egypt carrying her greatest treasure. She chose a remote location in the delta, a marsh area thick with papyrus reeds and home to countless birds and insects. Here, hidden from Set's eyes, she would attempt what no god had ever attempted before. She would bring back the dead. She would reverse death itself. She would prove that love was stronger than murder, that devotion could defeat even the finality of ending. The magic required would be complex and difficult. The time needed would be considerable. But Isis had not searched for months only to give up now. She prepared a shelter among the reeds. She laid Osiris's body on a bed of lotus flowers and sweet herbs. She began to gather the ingredients for spells never before spoken, to prepare rituals never before performed. She would need help, she knew. This magic would require more than even she alone could provide. She sent word secretly to Nephthys, to Anubis, to Thoth, to those gods who had not supported Set's coup, who had mourned Osiris's death, who might be willing to risk the new pharaoh's wrath to right this cosmic wrong. And slowly, carefully, they came. One by one, divine beings made their way to the marshes where Isis worked, drawn by loyalty, by justice, by the sense that what Set had done violated something fundamental in the universe's design. Together, they would attempt the impossible. They would challenge death itself. They would restore the king of the gods. But Set was not idle, and the desert wind carries secrets far. The marsh sang with life in the early morning. Frogs croaked their ancient chorus. Waterbirds called to each other in the pre-dawn darkness. Papyrus reeds rustled in the breeze off the Mediterranean. And in a hidden clearing, surrounded by protective spells and the vigilance of loyal gods, Isis bent over Osiris's body, her hands moving in patterns of restoration, her voice chanting words of power. She had been working for weeks, and progress was agonizingly slow. The magic required to reverse death was not a single spell, but a complex weaving of hundreds of smaller magics, each one building upon the last. She had to restore each organ, reanimate each limb, call back the vital forces that had fled when Osiris died. It was like reassembling a shattered vase, piece by piece, except that each piece was invisible and the pattern had never been attempted before. But there were signs of hope. Color was slowly returning to Osiris's skin, hints of green beginning to show beneath the gray. His body had begun to take on a less rigid quality, as if the muscles were remembering their flexibility. His face, peaceful in death, seemed on the verge of expression, as if he might at any moment open his eyes. Nephthys kept watch at the edge of the clearing, her senses extended for any sign of danger. Anubis, the jackal-headed god, assisted with the preparation of special unguents and oils, substances that would help preserve and restore divine flesh. Thoth recorded every step of the process, his scribe's hand moving rapidly across papyrus, documenting this unprecedented magic for potential future need. They were creating something new, the science of resurrection, the art of defeating death. They should have known that such powerful magic would not go unnoticed. They should have realized that spells of this magnitude sent ripples through the fabric of reality, ripples that could be felt by anyone sensitive enough, powerful enough, watching carefully enough. Set felt the magic stirring in his delta marshes. From his palace in Memphis, surrounded by the power he had seized, he felt something that made his divine blood run cold. Osiris. His brother was not truly gone. Somehow, impossibly, Isis had found the body. Somehow she was attempting to undo what he had done. All of Set's power, all of his ambition, all of his claim to the throne rested on Osiris remaining dead. If his brother returned, Set would be revealed as a murderer and a traitor. The other gods would unite against him. Egypt itself would rise in rebellion. Everything he had gained would be lost, and his punishment would be terrible and eternal. Set could not allow this to happen. He would not allow it. He had gone too far to turn back now. He gathered his most loyal followers, those beings of chaos who served him without question, who thrived on disorder and violence. He armed them. He gave them one command: find Osiris's body and destroy it completely. Not just kill it again, but obliterate it. Scatter it so thoroughly that no magic, not even Isis's, could ever piece it back together. Set himself led the expedition, moving through Egypt with the speed of a desert storm. He knew the delta well, knew where one might hide in its maze of channels and reed beds. And the ripples of Isis's magic were like a beacon, growing stronger as her work progressed, making it easier and easier to locate her. In the marsh, Nephthys suddenly tensed. "He comes," she whispered urgently. "Set is coming, and he brings an army." Isis looked up from her work, her face showing the exhaustion of weeks of constant magical effort. "How close?" "Close enough. Minutes, not hours. You must hide Osiris. You must flee." But Isis shook her head slowly. "I cannot move him yet. The magic is at a critical stage. If I stop now, if I disrupt the spell mid-casting, all the progress will be lost. Weeks of work destroyed in an instant. I need more time." "There is no more time," Nephthys insisted, and now they could all hear it, the sound of approaching chaos, of reality itself bending under Set's rage and determination. Isis made a decision that cost her everything. "Then you must go, all of you. If Set finds you here, if he knows you have been helping me, his vengeance will be terrible. Go. Scatter. Return to your temples and pretend ignorance. I will face him alone." "We cannot leave you," Thoth protested, but Isis was already pushing them away with her magic, compelling them to flee despite their loyalty. "I am Isis," she said, and her voice carried the authority of the ages. "I am magic itself. I do not need protecting. But I need Set to believe I am alone, that I have no allies. I need him to think he has won. Now go." They fled, reluctantly, into the maze of the delta, and Isis turned back to Osiris, her hands moving faster now, her voice rising in urgency, trying desperately to complete enough of the spell that some part of her work might be saved. Set burst into the clearing like a desert wind given form. His followers spread out, surrounding the space, cutting off any escape. And Set himself stood before Isis, his face twisted with rage and fear and determination. "You should have let him go," Set said, and his voice shook with emotion. "You should have mourned and moved on, but you couldn't, could you? You had to search, you had to find him, you had to try to bring him back." Isis stood between Set and Osiris's body, her own exhaustion forgotten in the face of this threat. "He is my husband, the rightful king of Egypt. What you did was murder and betrayal. I will restore him, Set. I will undo your crime." "No," Set said flatly, "you will not." The battle that followed was brief but cataclysmic. Isis's magic blazed like the sun itself, barriers of pure force erupting between Set and Osiris. But Set was prepared this time, had brought counterspells and chaos magic specifically designed to shatter her defenses. And while Isis was powerful, she was also exhausted from weeks of restoration work, her magical reserves depleted, her divine strength running on will alone. Set's followers overwhelmed her position. They pushed her back, away from Osiris's body, separating her from the one she sought to protect. And Set himself reached the body that lay on its bed of lotus and herbs. "You want to restore him," Set screamed, his voice raw with mingled rage and pain and something that might have been grief for the brother he had once loved and now hated. "Then restore this." What Set did next would echo through Egyptian mythology for thousands of years. He tore Osiris's body apart, not with tools, not with weapons, but with his bare hands, divine strength ripping through divine flesh. He tore his brother into pieces. 14 pieces in some accounts, 16 in others, 42 in still different versions. The exact number varied with the telling, but the horror remained constant. Osiris was dismembered. His body, so carefully preserved, so painstakingly being restored, was reduced to scattered parts. And Set, in his rage and desperation, flung those pieces far and wide across the length and breadth of Egypt. A hand here, a foot there, organs scattered to the 4 directions, each piece thrown as far as Set's considerable strength could manage. Isis screamed, a sound of pure anguish that made the heavens themselves tremble. She tried to stop him, tried to gather the pieces as they were torn away, but Set's followers held her back, chaos magic binding her until Set's terrible work was complete. When it was done, When Osiris had been utterly scattered across Egypt, Set stood panting, his hands stained with his brother's divine blood. He looked at Isis, and in his eyes she saw something terrible. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but emptiness. The desperate emptiness of someone who has crossed a line they can never uncross, who has done something so terrible that they themselves are changed forever by it. "Let her go," Set said to his followers. "Let her search, if she wishes. Let her walk the length of Egypt again, but she will never find all the pieces. Never. And without a complete body, even her magic cannot bring him back. Osiris is gone, Isis, truly gone. Now and forever." He left then, taking his followers with him, leaving Isis alone in the destroyed clearing, surrounded by lotus flowers stained with divine blood, holding nothing but her grief and her rage and her unbreakable determination. For Set was wrong about one thing. He had underestimated how far love could reach, how much devotion could endure, how powerful determination could be when fueled by loss and hope and an absolute refusal to surrender to despair. Isis, goddess of magic, looked at the blood-soaked ground. She looked at the empty space where Osiris's body had lain, and she made a vow that would reshape the very concept of death in Egyptian culture. "I will find every piece," she whispered to the wind. "Every single fragment. I will walk every cubit of Egypt. I will search every town and village, every field and desert. I will recover my husband from whatever corners of this land his pieces have fallen to, and I will restore him, not as he was, perhaps, but restored nonetheless. You have not won, Set. You have only shown me how far I must go, and I will go that far. I swear it by my name, by my power, by every star in the sky." The second search had begun, and this one would be even longer, even more difficult, even more impossible than the first. But Isis had proven once already that she could achieve the impossible. She would prove it again. Isis began again. But this time, she did not walk alone. Word of what Set had done spread through Egypt like the Nile flood, swift and unstoppable. The people, who had whispered support for their lost king, now spoke openly despite the danger. Set had gone too far. Murder was terrible enough, but to dismember a body, to prevent proper burial, to deny the deceased their journey to the afterlife, this violated the deepest principles of Egyptian belief. The Egyptians understood that the body was sacred. It was the house of the soul, the physical anchor for the Ka and the Ba, those essential elements of being that survived death. To scatter a body across the land was to condemn that soul to eternal wandering, to prevent them from ever finding peace in the afterlife. It was cruelty beyond measure, and so when Isis began her second search, she found helpers everywhere she went. Farmers left their fields to aid her. Fishermen abandoned their nets. Women came out of their homes. Even children joined the search, scouring the banks of canals and irrigation ditches. Egypt itself became part of Isis's quest. An entire civilization united in the search for their lost king. Nephthys joined her sister openly now, no longer caring about Set's rage. "I am done with him," she told Isis quietly. "I married chaos thinking it could be balanced with love. But what he has done goes beyond chaos. It is simple cruelty. I will help you find every piece of our brother. Anubis, the jackal god, proved invaluable. His nature was particularly suited to finding things, his connection to death making him sensitive to the presence of divine remains. He ranged far ahead of Isis, his keen senses detecting traces of Osiris's presence, leading the search party to locations they might never have found otherwise. The first piece was discovered in a field outside Memphis, buried in the mud where Set had thrown it. A hand, still bearing the signet ring that marked Osiris as king. The farmer who found it had seen the glint of gold while plowing and had dug carefully, reverently, and then sent word to Isis. She came and collected it with infinite gentleness, placing it in a special container prepared with preservative herbs and magic. "One," she whispered, "one out of many. But one is better than none." The second piece was found days later, pulled from the Nile by fishermen who recognized that this was no ordinary catch. An arm, strong and intact, the skin still bearing that faint green tinge that marked Osiris as the god of fertility. It was brought to Isis with ceremony, and she added it to her collection with tears of gratitude. And so it went, piece by piece, location by location. A foot discovered in a marsh by a bird-catcher, a leg found in the desert sands by a caravan merchant, internal organs located in various towns where they had landed in temple courtyards or public squares or private gardens. Each discovery was marked, each location remembered, and something remarkable began to happen. Wherever a piece of Osiris was found, Isis built a shrine, a small temple to honor the spot where part of her husband had rested. These shrines became sacred sites, places of pilgrimage, locations where the boundary between life and death seemed thin and permeable. The Egyptians would later claim that 14 shrines existed, or 16 or 42 each one, marking a piece of Osiris, each one a node in a sacred geography that transformed all of Egypt into a vast memorial to the murdered god. But there was one piece that Isis could not find, one part of Osiris that eluded every search, resisted every magical attempt at location, remained hidden despite months of effort. The phallus. Set had thrown it into the Nile, and there it had been consumed by fish. The oxyrhynchus fish, the Nile carp, creatures that the Egyptians would forever after refuse to eat, declaring them sacred and forbidden. This was a crisis. Egyptian belief held that the body needed to be complete for the soul to continue existing in the afterlife. Without every piece, restoration would be impossible. Osiris would remain forever incomplete, forever prevented from entering the realm of the dead or returning to the realm of the living. He would be trapped in a liminal space, neither here nor there, existing but not truly alive. But Isis had not searched this long, had not devoted months of her existence to this quest, had not walked every cubit of Egypt only to be defeated by one missing piece. She would find a solution. She would use her magic, her intelligence, her determination to overcome this final obstacle. She gathered the pieces she had recovered, laying them out in order on a table of gold. She called upon Anubis, whose knowledge of death and preservation was profound. She summoned Nephthys, whose magic complemented her own. She invited Thoth, whose wisdom might provide insights she had not considered. Together, these divine beings would attempt something unprecedented. They would create the first mummy. They would preserve Osiris's body in a way that would allow his soul to remain anchored to it, even incomplete. And Isis would use her magic to recreate the missing piece, fashioning it from gold and linen, from magic and memory, from love and need. Anubis led the process, his hands moving with a skill that would define his role for all of Egyptian history. He washed the body with sacred water. He anointed it with oils of myrrh and cedar. He wrapped each piece carefully in linen bandages, layer upon layer, speaking spells of preservation and protection with each wrapping. He placed amulets between the layers, the Djed pillar for stability, the Tayet knot for protection, the scarab for resurrection. Isis worked her magic as he worked his craft. She shaped gold into the form of the missing piece, imbuing it with life essence, with generative power, with all the fertility and creative force that Osiris had embodied. It was not merely a replacement. It was a magical analog, a symbol made real through divine will, functioning because she believed it would, powerful because love made it so. And then, when the body was as complete as they could make it, when every available piece had been assembled and wrapped, when the golden replacement had been integrated with the rest, Isis attempted something that no god had ever done before. She transformed herself into a kestrel, a bird of prey sacred to her, and she flew. She hovered above Osiris's mummified form, her wings beating in a rhythm that echoed the heartbeat that had stopped so long ago. And she began to chant, a spell of animation, a calling across the boundary between life and death. She beat her wings faster, creating a wind that carried her magic, that breathed divine breath into the wrapped form below. She called his name, his true name, the secret name that held power over his very essence. Osiris, she called, beloved, husband, king, return to me. Not to life, perhaps, but to some form of existence. Return enough that I might not lose you completely. Return enough that we might have one final moment together. Return. And, impossibly, miraculously, Osiris stirred. The moment hung suspended between worlds, between breath and stillness, between death and something else entirely. Osiris's chest, wrapped in its layers of linen, rose slightly, then fell, then rose again. It was not quite breathing. The dead do not breathe as the living do. But it was movement, animation, the return of some essential quality that had been absent. Isis landed beside him, transforming back into her divine form, her hands trembling as she touched his rapt face. Beneath her fingers, she felt warmth returning. Beneath the linen, she saw the faint green glow of his skin beginning to shine through. "Osiris," she whispered, afraid to hope, afraid to believe that she had actually succeeded in this impossible task. His eyes opened, not the bright, vital eyes of the living, but eyes that held the shadows of death within them, eyes that had seen beyond the veil that separated existence from non-existence. When he looked at Isis, his gaze held depths it had never contained before. Knowledge of endings, understanding of mortality, wisdom bought at the price of his own death. "Isis," he said, and his voice was like wind across sand, dry and distant but unmistakably his. "What have you done?" "I brought you back," she said, tears streaming down her face, joy and sorrow mingling in her divine heart. "I found every piece. I restored you. You're here. You're with me again." Osiris's wrapped hand lifted slowly to touch her face, wiping away her tears with a gentleness that broke her heart. "I am here," he agreed, "but not as I was. I have died, Isis. I have crossed the boundary that even gods were not meant to cross. I cannot return to the living world as I once was. I am changed." And it was true. Osiris had become something new, something unprecedented in the divine order. He was neither fully alive nor completely dead. He existed in a liminal space, a twilight realm between states of being. He had died and been resurrected, but the resurrection was not complete, could never be complete. Death, once experienced, leaves its mark forever. "Then what?" Isis asked, though she feared the answer. "What happens now? Do you fade away despite all my efforts? Was this all for nothing?" "Not nothing," Osiris assured her, his voice growing stronger as he became more accustomed to this new form of existence. "Never nothing. You have done something extraordinary, beloved. You have shown that death need not be final, that love can reach beyond the grave, that the bonds we forge in life can survive even ending itself. But I cannot remain in the living world. My place now is elsewhere." He sat up slowly, the movement causing layers of linen to rustle like dry leaves. Around them, the other gods watched in silent awe. Anubis, who had prepared the body, looked upon his handiwork with something like pride. Nephthys wept quietly, seeing her brother restored but knowing the restoration was incomplete. Thoth's stylus moved rapidly across papyrus, recording every detail of this unprecedented moment. "There is a realm," Osiris continued, his dead eyes looking at something the others could not see, "that exists beneath the world of the living, a place where souls go after death, where they are judged and weighed, where they face the truth of how they lived. It has always existed, but it has been formless, chaotic, without order or governance. That is where I must go. That is where I am needed now." Understanding dawned in Isis's eyes. "You will rule the dead as you once ruled the living," Yes, I will become Lord of the Duat, King of the underworld, Judge of souls. I will bring order to that realm as I once brought order to Egypt. The dead will have a king who understands their journey because he has made it himself. And the living. The living will know that death is not an end, but a transition. A doorway, not a wall. It was, Isis realized, a kind of perfection. Tragic, yes. Not what she had hoped for, not the full restoration she had worked toward, but perfect nonetheless. Osiris had died, truly died, and in dying had become something more than he had been. He had become the bridge between life and death, the proof that consciousness could survive the body's end, the guarantee that love and identity persisted beyond mortality. "But before I go," Osiris said, and now his voice held a warmth that reminded Isis of the god he had been before murder transformed him. "We have one more gift to exchange, one more act of creation between us." He reached for her, and Isis understood. They came together, god and goddess, living and dead, in a union that transcended the boundaries between states of being. It was not physical in the way mortal love is physical. It was magic, pure and profound, the mingling of essences, the sharing of power, the creation of life from death itself. And from that impossible union, a child was conceived, a son who would carry his father's legacy and his mother's power, who would grow to challenge Set's rule, who would restore Maat to Egypt and avenge the murder that had shattered the divine order. A son whose name would echo through Egyptian history as one of the greatest gods of their pantheon. Horus, the hawk, the legitimate heir to the throne of Egypt. But that is another story, one that would unfold over years to come. For now, in this moment of impossible reunion, Isis and Osiris simply held each other, savoring time stolen from death itself, knowing that this moment could not last but treasuring it all the more for its transience. "I must go," Osiris finally said, though his voice held reluctance, held longing, held all the love he felt for the goddess who had refused to abandon him even to death. "The Duat calls me. The dead need their king." "I know," Isis whispered, though the words cost her everything. "But know this, my husband. Know that you were loved enough to be sought across the length of Egypt. Know that you were valued enough that an entire people joined in the search for you. Know that even death could not separate us completely, because love itself is a kind of magic that transcends all boundaries." Osiris stood, the linen wrappings that made him the first mummy rustling with his movement. He looked at each of the gods who had helped restore him. Nephthys, his sister who had chosen love over loyalty to her husband. Anubis, who had learned the art of preservation in service to this restoration. Thoth, who had recorded everything so that knowledge of resurrection would not be lost. "Thank you," he said simply. "What you have done here will change the nature of existence itself. You have created hope where there was only despair. You have made death a transition rather than an ending. All of Egypt, all of humanity, will benefit from what you have accomplished here today." Then he looked back at Isis one final time. "Raise our son well. Teach him justice and wisdom. Prepare him to reclaim what Set has stolen, and know that I will watch over both of you from the Duat, that my love reaches across the boundary between life and death, that we will meet again when your own journey eventually brings you to my realm." And then Osiris, the green god, the murdered king, the first to die and the first to be resurrected, descended, not into the earth exactly, but down through layers of reality, into the realm that would thereafter be known as his kingdom, the Duat, the underworld, the place of judgment and transformation and eternal existence. Isis watched him go, her hand resting on her belly where the seed of Horus grew, where vengeance and restoration were already taking form. She had lost her husband to the living world, yes. But she had gained something, too. She had proven that love was the strongest magic, that death could be challenged, that endings were not always final, and she had created a new understanding of mortality that would define Egyptian civilization for 3,000 years. The age of resurrection had begun. The marsh became Isis's sanctuary and her fortress, deep in the papyrus thickets of the delta, where channels of water wound through dense stands of reeds taller than a man, where ibises waded and crocodiles sunned themselves on muddy banks. The goddess took refuge. Here, hidden from Set's eyes and protected by her magic, she would wait out her pregnancy and prepare for the birth of the one who would challenge the usurper king. But hiding a goddess, especially one as powerful as Isis, is not a simple matter. Her presence affected the world around her. The reeds grew thicker, more protective. The waters teemed with fish. Birds flocked to the area in unprecedented numbers, their songs creating a constant chorus of sound that masked other noises, that prevented Set's spies from hearing anything useful. The marsh itself became sentient in a way, responsive to Isis's needs, hostile to her enemies. Nephthys visited often, bringing supplies and news from the outside world. Set's rule, she reported, was growing more tyrannical by the day. The unpredictability of the Nile floods had caused famine in some regions and flooding in others. The people whispered rebellion but lacked a leader, lacked hope, lacked any concrete reason to believe that change was possible. They need to know about Horus, Nephthys urged. They need to know that an heir exists, that Osiris's line continues, that there is hope for restoration. But Isis shook her head, her hand protective over her swelling belly. Not yet. If Set knows about the child, he will do everything in his power to destroy him before he is born. No, we must keep this secret until Horus is old enough, strong enough, trained enough to defend himself. Patience, sister. We have waited this long. We can wait longer. The pregnancy was unlike any other in the history of gods or mortals. Isis carried within her the child of a dead father, a boy conceived in the liminal moment between worlds, a being who would embody both life and death, both divine right and mortal vengeance. She felt him growing, felt his power, felt the destiny that coiled around him like the Urious serpent around a pharaoh's crown. When the birth pains finally came, Isis was alone, except for Nephthys. This, too, was deliberate. No grand assembly of gods, no witnesses who might let something slip to Set's spies. Just two sisters in a reed shelter, bringing a god into the world with only magic and determination to assist them. Horus was born with the rising sun, and his cry echoed across the marsh like a hawk's shriek. Even as an infant, his divine nature was evident. His eyes were the sharp, golden eyes of a raptor. His cry carried authority and power. In the moment of his birth, every hawk in Egypt lifted its voice in unison, a chorus of shrieks that made Set pause in his palace and wonder what omen had manifested. Isis held her son and wept with joy and grief mingled together. Joy for this new life, this perfect child who represented hope and justice. Grief for the father who would never hold him, never see him grow, never teach him the lessons of kingship as fathers should. But Osiris was watching, she knew. From the Duat, from his throne in the underworld, he saw his son and smiled. "You are Horus," Isis whispered to the infant in her arms. "The hawk, the avenger, the rightful king. You are the son of Osiris and the hope of Egypt. But first, before all of that, you are my beloved child, and I will protect you with everything I am." Raising a divine child in secret proved to be its own kind of challenge. Horus grew quickly, as gods do, but his childhood was unlike that of the previous generation of deities. Where Osiris had been raised in palaces, surrounded by worshippers and attendants, Horus knew only the marsh. Where Set had learned to command armies and wield power openly, Horus learned stealth and patience. His tutors were the marsh itself and his mother's wisdom. Isis taught him everything she knew. She taught him magic, showing him how to speak the words of power, how to know the true names of things, how to bend reality to his will. She taught him the history of Egypt, the stories of his father's reign, the tale of Set's betrayal and her own long search. She taught him about justice and order, about Maat and its importance, about why the throne he would one day claim was not just a seat of power but a sacred responsibility. Your father ruled not for himself, she told him, but for Egypt, for the people, for the gods, for the cosmic order itself. When you take the throne, and you will take it, my son, remember this: a king serves. Power is not privilege, it is duty. Nephthys brought other tutors when she could. Thoth came in secret to teach the young god writing and mathematics, astronomy and wisdom. Anubis taught him about death and the afterlife, about his father's realm, about the journey that all souls must make. Even some of the older gods who had served Osiris, who had gone silent under Set's rule but never surrendered their loyalty, found ways to visit the marsh and share their knowledge. Horus absorbed everything. He was brilliant, like his mother, strong, like his father, but he also carried something else, something darker and more dangerous: anger, righteous fury at what had been done to his father, at the injustice that had placed Set on the throne that should have been his birthright. This anger, Isis knew, could be both weapon and danger. Wielded properly, it could fuel his challenge to Set. Unchecked, it could make him as destructive as the chaos god himself. "You are angry," Isis said to him one day when he was older, when his features had taken on the sharp, predatory quality of a hawk, even in his human-shaped form. "I see it in you, burning like a fire in your heart, and your anger is justified. But remember this, my son, you must be better than Set, not just stronger, better. If you defeat him only to become like him, then Egypt gains nothing. Vengeance is your right, but justice must be your goal." Horus nodded, but in his golden eyes, the fire of retribution still burned. He had never known his father except through stories. He had never walked openly in Egypt, never experienced the worship and love that should have been his as the prince of the gods. His entire childhood had been hiding, waiting, preparing for a confrontation that grew nearer with each passing season. The years passed in the marsh. Horus grew from infant to child to young god, his power increasing, his skills sharpening. He could take the form of a hawk at will, soaring high above the delta, seeing all of Egypt spread beneath him. He could fight with weapons or with magic, had learned both the warrior's arts and the sorcerer's secrets. He was, by any measure, ready. But Isis made him wait. "Not yet," she would say when he chafed at remaining hidden. "Not quite yet. You must be certain of victory, must be absolutely prepared, because you will only get one chance. If Set defeats you, there will be no second attempt. All will be lost." Until finally, the day came when even Isis could no longer justify delay. Horus had reached his full power. The people of Egypt were restless, ready to support a legitimate claimant to the throne. The gods who had served Osiris were tired of Set's chaotic rule and ready to act if given a leader to follow. Everything was aligned. "It is time," Isis told her son, and her voice carried both pride and fear. "Time to claim your birthright, time to challenge Set, time to restore Maat to Egypt." Horus stood before her, tall and powerful, a god in his prime. His hawk eyes met her gaze steadily. "I am ready, mother. I have been ready for years. But tell me, when I face Set in combat, when the moment comes to strike the final blow, should I kill him or show mercy?" It was the question Isis had dreaded, the question that had no easy answer. Set was a murderer and a usurper, yes, but he was also necessary to the cosmic order. Chaos was not evil in itself. The desert was harsh but protected Egypt. Storms destroyed but also cleansed. Without Set, without some force of disorder, the universe would become static, unchanging, ultimately sterile. I cannot answer that for you, Isis said slowly. That choice must be yours, made in the moment, with all the wisdom you have gained. But I will say this, remember what I taught you. Be better than your enemy. Be what Egypt needs, not what your anger wants. The world does not need another destroyer, son. It needs a restorer. Horus embraced his mother then, and for a moment he was not the avenger, not the hawk, not the future king. He was simply her child, holding her close, drawing strength from her love one last time before stepping out of the marsh and into destiny. I will make you proud, he whispered, and I will make my father proud. Watch me, mother. Watch me reclaim what Set stole. He stepped out of the protective embrace of the papyrus reeds and spread his wings. In his hawk form, he rose into the sky, circling higher and higher until he was just a speck against the sun. And then he turned south, toward Memphis, toward the palace, toward the throne that had been denied him since birth, toward Set. The age of vengeance had begun, and Egypt held its breath, waiting to see whether justice or chaos would prevail. The conflict between Horus and Set would become one of the most famous divine struggles in all of Egyptian mythology. It was not a simple battle, not a single confrontation that determined the outcome. Instead, it was a long, complex contest that involved not just combat but cunning, not just strength but strategy, not just the two combatants but the entire pantheon of Egyptian gods sitting in judgment. When Horus first appeared before the divine council, announcing his identity and his claim to the throne, Set laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that echoed through the hall. This child, this boy who had hidden in marshes his entire life, thought he could challenge the god of chaos, the lord of the desert, the one who had ruled Egypt for years. You are nothing, Set declared, a pretender. The son of a dead god has no claim. I rule Egypt by right of power, by right of conquest. If you want the throne, boy, you'll have to take it from me. And so the contests began. They fought in the sky, hawk against storm. They fought in the desert, blade against blade. They fought with magic, spell countering spell, transformation matched by transformation. Sometimes Horus seemed to have the advantage, his youth and skill overwhelming Set's experience. Other times, Set's raw power and cunning would turn the tide in his favor. The gods watched these contests with divided opinions. Some supported Horus, seeing in him the legitimate heir, the restorer of Ma'at, the rightful king. Others hesitated, pointing out that Set had ruled for years and that stability, even chaotic stability, might be better than civil war among the gods. Still, others tried to find compromise, suggesting that Egypt might be divided between them, or that they might rule together, or that the contest should continue until one emerged as the clear victor. But Isis did not simply watch and wait. She used every tool at her disposal to support her son, to weaken Set's position, to sway the council toward recognition of Horus's claim. She spoke to the gods individually, reminding them of Osiris's just rule, of Set's betrayal, of the murder that had violated the very foundations of Ma'at. She used her magic to interfere with Set's schemes, to protect Horus when his battles went poorly, to ensure that her son survived to fight another day. Set, in turn, tried every trick and deception he could devise. He challenged Horus to contests that favored chaos over order. He tried to seduce him with offers of power, promising him rulership of desert lands if he would only abandon his claim to all of Egypt. He even attempted treachery, trying to kill Horus in ways that would not violate the terms of their formal contests. The battles between them took many forms. In one famous episode, they transformed themselves into hippopotamuses and fought beneath the Nile's waters, their divine strength making the river boil and churn. In another, they raced in boats made of stone, a test that seemed to favor Set's affinity for difficult challenges, until Horus revealed that his boat was actually wood covered in plaster, while Set's had indeed been carved from stone and promptly sank. But the most significant battle was one that nearly cost Horus everything. In a fierce confrontation, Set managed to tear out one of Horus's eyes. Not merely injure it, but completely remove it, leaving the young god wounded and partially blinded. It was a terrible injury, one that symbolically diminished Horus's power, for the Eye of Horus was itself a symbol of kingship and divine authority. Isis found her son bleeding and half-blind, and her magic flared with motherly fury. But Set was already gone, having taken the eye as a trophy. For a moment, despair threatened to overwhelm even Isis's determination. How could Horus continue the contest like this? How could he hope to defeat Set while missing such a crucial part of himself? But Thoth, god of wisdom and healing, came to their aid. Using his profound knowledge of magic and medicine, he restored Horus's eye. Or perhaps he created a new one. Or perhaps he retrieved the original from Set's possession. The stories vary on the details, but the outcome was consistent. Horus was made whole again, his eye restored and even more powerful than before. The restored eye of Horus became a symbol of healing and protection, an amulet that Egyptians would wear for thousands of years. It represented wholeness recovered from brokenness, vision restored, power reclaimed. In a sense, it symbolized what Isis herself had done for Osiris, taking what was broken and making it whole again, even if the wholeness was different from what had existed before. The contests continued, month after month, year after year. Neither Horus nor Set could achieve complete victory. The Divine Council grew weary of the conflict, frustrated by the deadlock. Egypt suffered under the uncertainty, the floods remaining unpredictable, the order of Mahat continuing to fray. Finally, the gods made a decision. They would consult Osiris himself. Though he ruled the Duat and could not return to the living world, his wisdom could still be sought. Thoth journeyed to the underworld to ask the judgment of the original king of Egypt. Who should rule? The son or the usurper? The legitimate heir or the powerful challenger? Osiris's answer came back clear and unequivocal. The throne belongs to my son. Horus is the rightful king by every law of succession, by every principle of Ma'at, by every standard of justice. Set may be powerful, but power alone does not confer legitimacy. Let my son rule Egypt. Let Set find his place in the cosmos, for he has his role to play, but that role is not as pharaoh. The words of Osiris carried weight that no living god's opinion could match. He had ruled Egypt justly. He had died and been resurrected. He had become Lord of the Duat, Judge of souls, the one who weighed hearts against the feather of truth. His word was law, even for the Divine Council. Reluctantly, slowly, the gods aligned themselves behind Horus. Even those who had supported Set, even those who had argued for compromise, recognized that to go against Osiris's judgment would be to violate Ma'at itself. The decision was made. Horus would be king. But Set did not accept defeat gracefully. When the council pronounced their judgment, when they moved to crown Horus as the rightful pharaoh of Egypt, Set's rage exploded like a desert storm. He fought, not with strategy or cunning now, but with pure fury, determined that if he could not rule Egypt, then no one would. He would destroy the throne itself rather than see it given to his nephew. The final battle was cataclysmic. Set unleashed chaos in its purest form, storms and earthquakes, plagues and disasters. Horus met him with all the power Isis had taught him, with all the divine authority of his birthright, with all the strength of justice confronting betrayal. The sky darkened. The earth shook. The Nile itself seemed to run backward in its course. And in that final moment, when Horus had Set at his mercy, when the killing blow could finally be struck, the young god remembered his mother's words. Be better than your enemy. Be what Egypt needs. Horus lowered his weapon. You are defeated, he told Set, but I will not kill you. You are chaos, and chaos has its place in the cosmic order. You are the storm, and storms are sometimes necessary. But you are not a king. You are not a ruler of the living. I banish you to the desert that is your home, to the margins of Egypt where you belong. Defend our borders. Fight our enemies. Be what you were meant to be, not what your ambition made you try to become. It was mercy, and it was wisdom, and it was justice all together. Set, seeing the determination in his nephew's eyes, seeing that Horus had truly become what Osiris had been, finally accepted defeat. He went to the desert, to the margins, taking his place as guardian and outsider rather than king. And Horus ascended to the throne of Egypt, wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, carrying the crook and flail of pharaonic authority, embodying the restoration of Maat after years of chaos. The age of order had returned, but it had returned changed, deepened by the knowledge of what happens when order fails, when betrayal poisons family, when death touches even the immortal. Nothing would ever be simple again. But perhaps that was as it should be. Stand now on the banks of the Nile at sunrise. The river flows as it always has, eternal and life-giving, carrying the same waters that Isis wept into, that carried Osiris's coffin to distant shores, that witnessed the birth of the Avenger in its marsh. The sun rises, and for a moment you can almost see Ra in his solar bark, sailing across the sky as he has since the beginning of time. But look closer. The Nile is not just water. It is memory. Every flood carries the story of death and resurrection, of loss and recovery, of love that refuses to surrender to ending. The Egyptians knew this. For 3,000 years they told this story, carved it into temple walls, spoke it in rituals, lived it in their understanding of what lay beyond death. The myth of Isis and Osiris became the foundation of Egyptian belief about the afterlife. Because Osiris had died and been resurrected, because he had become Lord of the Duat, every Egyptian who died properly, who was mummified as Osiris was mummified, who knew the proper spells and underwent the proper rituals, might also be resurrected, might also live again in some form. Death was not an ending, but a transformation. To become Osiris was what they said. To die was to follow the same journey the god had taken, to be judged as he now judged others, to find eternal life in the realm he ruled. Every mummy created in Egypt, from the greatest pharaoh to the humblest farmer who could afford the ritual, was an echo of that first mummification that Isis and Anubis performed. Every funerary text spoke variations of the spells that had restored the murdered god. And Isis became the model of devotion itself. Temples to her spread beyond Egypt, through Greece and Rome, across the ancient world. She was the Great Mother, the protector, the goddess of magic, but most of all, she was she who did not give up, she who searched, she who loved beyond death. Mothers prayed to her for protection of their children. The dying called upon her for comfort. Those who grieved sought her understanding, for who better to understand grief than the goddess who had wept enough to flood the Nile? The story spread and evolved. Different cultures added their own elements, changed details, adapted the myth to their own understanding. But the core remained constant. Love stronger than death. Devotion that could overcome any obstacle. The promise that ending was not final, that resurrection was possible, that loss could be transformed into something sacred. Even today, millennia after the last temple to Isis fell silent, millennia after the last priest of Osiris performed the last ritual, the story persists. It exists in museums where artifacts whisper their ancient truths. It lives in books where scholars piece together fragments of a vanished world. It breathes in every story of love defying death, every tale of resurrection, every belief that what we cherish can somehow survive beyond ending. The ancient Egyptians would be pleased perhaps to know that their myth outlived their civilization, that Isis and Osiris, who existed in stone and prayer for 3,000 years, continue to exist in memory and story for thousands more. that the first murder and the first resurrection still teach us something about the human heart, about devotion, about the nature of death and what might lie beyond it. Set found his place too in the end. The chaos god who murdered his brother became the protector of Ra's solar bark, the one who fought the serpent Apophis each night as Ra journeyed through the underworld. He became necessary again, his destructive power channeled toward protection rather than betrayal. The Egyptians understood something profound. Even the villain has a role to play. Even chaos serves the cosmic order in its way. And Horus ruled Egypt in his father's image, bringing back the prosperity and justice of the Golden Age. But he ruled with the knowledge that his mother had given him, the wisdom bought through suffering. He knew that order must always be vigilant against chaos. That kingship was responsibility, not privilege. That power must be tempered with mercy, justice with compassion. The story of Isis and Osiris is, in the end, a very human story despite being told about gods. It speaks to our deepest fears and our highest hopes, the fear of loss, of death, of seeing those we love taken from us, the hope that love persists, that death can be overcome, that devotion matters, that what we do for each other echoes in eternity. The ancient Egyptians built pyramids that would stand for thousands of years. They carved their names in stone to be remembered forever. They mummified their bodies to preserve them against decay. All of this was their attempt to defeat death, to assert that existence mattered, that individual lives had meaning that transcended mortality. And at the center of all these efforts, inspiring them, justifying them, giving them their sacred meaning, was this story. The story of a goddess who refused to accept loss. The story of a god who died but continued to exist. The story of love that literally reshaped reality itself, that created the possibility of life after death, that proved suffering could be transformed into meaning. The Nile flows on, carrying its ancient secrets. Somewhere in its depths might still rest pieces of the story, fragments of the past, echoes of divine drama. The desert wind blows as Set once blew, chaotic and powerful. The hawk circles overhead as Horus circled, watching, waiting, protecting. And in every temple ruin, in every hieroglyphic text, in every preserved mummy, the voice of Isis whispers still, "Love endures. Death is not the end. We can survive what breaks us." This is what the ancient Egyptians believed. This is what they taught through their great myth of death and resurrection. And perhaps, in our own way, we believe it still. We tell our own stories of love defeating death. We hold our own faith that what matters most somehow survives. We create our own versions of immortality through memory, through art, through the stories we pass down generation to generation. The myth of Isis and Osiris is not just their story. It is our story, too. The human story of facing loss with love, of refusing despair, of believing that somehow, impossibly, hopefully, endings can become beginnings. The sun sets over the Nile as it has set since time began. Ra descends into the western horizon, growing old, dying as he does each evening. But tomorrow he will rise again, reborn, renewed, eternal. Death and resurrection, ending and beginning. The eternal cycle that Osiris first embodied, that Isis first proved possible. The story continues. The story never ends. And in that endless continuation, in that refusal of finality, lies perhaps the greatest magic of all. The day is done. The story is told. The ancient gods sleep in their forgotten temples, but their myth lives on, whispered by the wind, carried by the river, eternal as hope itself. Rest now, traveler through time. Rest, knowing that the ancients understood what we still seek to understand. That love matters. That devotion endures. That even in death, especially in death, we prove what it means to be alive. The Odyssey is complete. The journey through ancient Egypt, through divine tragedy and triumph, through death and resurrection, has reached its end. But, like all the best stories, like all the most sacred myths, this ending is also a beginning. The eternal return. The cycle continues. Sleep well. And may you dream of gods and rivers, of hawks circling pyramids, of love that searches across eternity and finds what it seeks at last. The Nile flows on. The stars wheel overhead. And Isis and Osiris, together again in the realm beyond death, watch over Egypt still. Now let silence claim you. Let peace enfold you. Let the ancient tale fade into the sweetest darkness where stories become dreams and dreams become rest. The Odyssey is ended. The sleep begins.